So now, what we've just been dealing with are the video 1 and video 1, 2, and 3. Now, you have 3 layers, so you can layer up multiple videos on top of each other. You can just maybe bring one over, put it on video 2. So now, when you play it through, whichever video is on top is going to be the one that shows through. So just make sure that you have the right one on top when you're making your edits. So I generally try to keep everything on the same video 1 track, so you're not dealing with a bunch of tracks. But if it's needed, you can go through, add footage on top of other video tracks instead. So now at this point, I'm going to go over here, and I have some music. I went and found some royalty-free music. And what you can do is just click it. It's not going to have any video information into it. You're going to put it into the audio track. If you click this arrow, it drops down. Now you can see the waveform. And a waveform will tell you like what audio is actually there. So if you click and drop the one for the video, it's there just really small, so you can see it right here. Because you can see this is when the audio of a truck driving by. Okay, so we'll just turn that off. So now we have music to put over it. So now, if we hit play, it should have music playing over it. So now the music is about 3.5 minutes long. Our video isn't that long. So just like the video, we're going to grab the end of it, let it turn red, and you're going to drag it all the way over until it's at the very end of your video. So now, if you play it through, you have music that goes over your video that stops when your video does. Now the only thing that's different about the video and audio tracks is you can layer up a video on top of a video, and whichever one on top is the one that you'll see. Audio, you have multiple audio tracks at the bottom down here, audio 1, 2, and 3, and you can continue to add more of either of these tracks if needed. Audio will play all 3 of those tracks. It doesn't matter which one's on top. No matter what, it's going to play all the audio from all the tracks, unless you have the audio speakers turned off on it. And you can even rename these. Go right click, rename, and we just say this is camera audio. We can say this is our music track. And if we wanted, I even brought in some SFX, which is sound effects. Rename the last one. Rename it SFX for sound effects. So now what we can do is go to sound effects, and I just have ambient birds, just ambient noise. Drop that into the sound effects track. And then do the same thing we've done to the previous ones. Shorten it up to make it the same length. So we zoom back in. So now we have music with the ambient sound of birds chirping in the background, just so it's not just music, it does have some atmosphere to it. So now at this point we have a whole entire lockdown edit that has all transitions, that has a music track, that has some sound effects behind it. Generally, you never leave footage as is when you record it. It's not appealing, it's very flat or grayish. You can do what's called color correcting it. And so if you go over to effects, and it's the same place your transitions are at, instead, you go over to, instead of video transitions, you go to video effects. And they have tons of effects here, that all built-in stuff. And you go to color correction. And one of my favorite things to use is fast color corrector. So you click on that just like it, as if it's a transition. This time you don't need to drag it to the end of the clips. You drag it just on the whole clip on its own. So I'll drag it to this first one right here. Let go. And then to access this, you go to, make sure the clip you have selected that has an effect on it, go to Effect Controls. So now here you'll see is motion, opacity, time remapping, and here's the effect that was added is fast color correction. So inside of motion, this is where you can affect the position of your video. You see, you can click and drag that over. You can affect the scale of your video. You affect the rotation, the anchor point. So if you move the anchor point over and then try to rotate it, it will rotate off of a different anchor point. An anti-flicker filter, which if your footage has a flickering due to like fluorescent lights or the lighting that you have, this will help it. And right next to all of these effects are stopwatches. Now what that does is makes it to where you can animate these values. So let's say we go to the very beginning of our clip, we click the stopwatch for scale, and we'll make our scale really small, like 50%. And then by the end of our video, we want it to be at 100%. So then we'll go all the way to the very end of our video, and we'll bring it up to 100%. So that means we set a value at the beginning of our video and told it to say be at 50%. Then we went to the end of our video, we told it to be at 100%. So within the course of the whole entire video, it's slowly going to elevate from 50 to 100%. And we'll watch that now. Okay, so that is something you can do to add more emphasis on certain shots, to do digital zooms if you couldn't do a normal zoom while you're filming. You can animate the position as well. It doesn't have to just be scale. Anything that has a stopwatch means you can animate it. So just understand, you want to put a beginning and end point when you animate these values. And anytime you change that value in between there, it's going to add a new keyframe. These are called keyframes. It's going to add a new keyframe to that. So now getting to color correction. Just drag this right here. I'm going to get rid of all these keyframes. Okay, see? Get rid of all of them. Set this back to 100%. Now I'm going to scroll down, and this is where I'm dealing with fast color corrector. Now I've already made a color correction tutorial, and I'll send you a link right here to go and watch that. I use this effect, fast color corrector. You don't have to use fast color corrector. It's not the only way to color correct footage. It's the one I like to, that it is the fastest in my opinion. It just gets the job done without getting too intricate and complicated and all that. So I'm just going to be dealing with generally these two pars right here. So this over here controls the dark values, this controls the light values, and this controls the midtones. So like highlights, shadows, and midtones. So the only problem is some monitors aren't calibrated to be absolutely perfect to what you're seeing. It's not going to be completely accurate. And so what I like to do, Premiere has a little window helper that instead of looking at your footage, you'll be looking at what's called a histogram or waveform, where instead of color correcting by your eyes, you're color correcting looking at values, numbers, that'll tell you what's too dark and what's too bright. And so an easy way to bring that up here is you go to your workspace, and I drop down to color correction. This is one that Premiere has on its own. It changes your whole layout, but I'll show you how to change that back later. And so what we want to look at is this right here. So let's bring up the effect controls. Now again, I'm just going to be dealing with this bar right here. Watch what happens when I start dragging these sliders around. Okay, so now we see that everything got brighter, and now all of these bars and waveforms have now changed. So this bar right here represents what is blown out and unrecoverable, which means it's white hot and you can't see any color information in it. And down here is where you lose all detail in your shadows. And so watch what happens when I bring the shadows down. See, okay? Now there's a part right here where some shadows are lost, and you can really see that throughout the video. So I'll pull off that just a little bit. So now just already if we turn this little clicker right here, toggle the effect on and off, we can see what it's doing to the footage. It's giving it a really grungy look to it. And now you can leave it at that, or mess with the midtones a little bit. If you want it a little bit brighter, you bring everything up, and a little bit darker, you bring all that down. So then I'll just bring it up a bit. Okay. And here's a little saturation clicker right here. I usually bring it up to like 130% just to bring some color back into it. So now at this point, I've added a super basic color correction over it just to make it look that much more interesting. And now what I'll do is either go through and do exactly what I just did to all the other clips, but what I'm just going to do is I'm going to copy the one I already made onto the other clip so I don't have to make a new one. So you just Hit Control C, make sure that name is selected, and open up the timeline a little bit. Select all the clips and hit Control V. So now all these other clips have the same color correction that we've done. If I click on a clip and toggle it on and off, that's how it used to look like, that's how it looks like now. In some clips you might have to change it where, let's say, I think this looks too dark. You'll click on your clip, you go down to Fast Color Corrector, and look right here. All the values over here are all flat because all the dark values have been crushed. So what we'll do is bring the dark values up. And now it looks better. You can see the detail that's all the way in there. They're not all flattened out anymore. Now it just looks more visually pleasing. Okay, so now at this point, I'm done with my color correction. I want my original layout. So all I'll do is go to Window, Workspace, and just change it back to Editing, which is generally what it comes up as when you first open up Premiere. Okay, so now we have a whole video. We have music, we have color correction, we have transitions, we have sound effects, and let's just say we're ready to go and export this out. So you can go to File, Export, Media, or Control M. So what you can do is go to Format. Format, if you want a smaller file size, you want to go for H.264. I've already made a tutorial for this on my YouTube, and I'll put a link up for that right now. I'm going to go through it very generally right now. Just copy what I do, and you should be good to go. So for format, you're going to go to H.264, and your preset, they have plenty of presets. You can go through and pick any one of these that fit right for you. They even have, if you go all the way down, Vimeo and YouTube, depending on what you're going to do. Most people do YouTube. So we're doing 23.976 frames per second, 24 frames a second, and we're doing 1080p. That's our sequence settings. If you remember when we first made the project, it was 1920 by 1080 was the footage height and width, and we're shooting at 24 frames a second. Okay, so now you just scroll down. The only thing I would change is from VBR 2-pass, which is variable bitrate, change to CBR, which is constant bitrate. And generally, when you upload to YouTube, YouTube generally only goes up to like 5 megabits. So I usually do 5 to 10 just to make sure it gets all the quality it needs into it. So we can do 10. So it'll do a constant 10 bitrate all the way through. And just be clear, we have export video, export audio, so we'll have our music in it. Audio, you shouldn't need to change anything. It's all right already. So just video, just to make sure your bit rate is good, and that your height and your width and height match what your footage does, and your frame rate matches what your footage does. And then click output name, and this is where you're going to go to videos. For me, I had tutorials, Adobe tutorial, and this is where you're going to put it in your exported. So you can put export for YouTube. Click save. So now it's going to save, and you know where it's going to be at, and it's named. All you do is hit export. Okay, and something I just want to be really clear about is you'll see this line at the very top where it shows it's got a little red bar, and it's a light gray, and all this is dark gray. You take this bar and you drag it out. Let's say you drag it all the way up to, I believe this is about a minute. It'll render out 1 whole minute. Even though you don't have footage right here, it will render this out. So make sure, if this is the end of your video, this is where the end of this little tab should be. And see how it snaps right to it. Make sure that also is at the very end of it when you render out. So if you render something out and you get a lot of black at the very end of it, that's because this isn't butted up against the end of your clip.